starting my own company and building my own things has always been something that was, interest to me, being able to implement a vision from start to finish. The closer that I could get to that, the more rewarding and purposeful the work felt to me. One of the amazing things about working at a huge company is the company never just does one thing, right? Like Microsoft just does everything in the tech world.
Hello guys, today we have Cade Ryan, a LinkedIn connection and co-founder of 𝐎𝐃𝐄𝐄𝐒.
Yes,
How
sir.
are you, brother?
I'm very well. How are you?
Good. So we actually were in an event 2 days ago together.
Yes, we were. It was a great event. It was very well run.
Yeah, it was my first event really going out there, pitching my company, my podcast, and meeting so many people. And I told myself I have to bring my co-founder next time and do a bunch more.
Yeah, no, it was great. It was my first one like that in Vancouver. So for most of those events, I've had to travel because my company's mostly based in Europe. And so we've gone to a few events around there. And we had one in Toronto earlier this summer, but that's the first one that I've gotten to go to in Vancouver. And yeah, the scene is great. There's so many great people.
So many great people indeed. And it's unfortunate how Canada doesn't have much of those. And you can see that more maybe in the United States and Europe sometimes. It's good. It's great that Hossein Rajabi, his podcast coming out soon. And he's doing such great things. So we were talking off camera, right? You came here 2 years ago. There's an extensive story to cover in that sense. So can you just start from the beginning? Tell us about yourself, your story. How'd you start coding? What inspired you about all aspects so far?
Sure. So yeah, my background before starting this company was as a software engineer. I studied computer science in Ireland with my co-founder, actually. We've known each other since we were like 12 years old. We went to high school together and then studied computer science together as well. And so I studied computer science in Dublin, and then right after college started working as a software engineer at Microsoft. And I was with them for, in total, 5 years. I had 4 years with them in Ireland, and then I actually moved with them to Vancouver. And so that's kind of how I came here. Was me and my partner both moved with work from Ireland to Vancouver. And then I continued working with Microsoft for another year from here. And then in December of last year was when I left there and founded my own company with my co-founder in Ireland. And he's still based in Ireland.
So he still lives there?
Yeah. He's moved around a little bit, but always, at least since we started the company, he's always been in Europe. And so the company is an Irish company, and most of the team is based there.
Very, very interesting. So it's great. First of all, it's great finding a company with someone you know so well. It's truly a treat. And that's fantastic that you know that guy and you found him. But moving back, so how was the experience working for 5 years for such a big company? Like, what was the environment? What did you learn from it, truly?
You learn so much. One of the amazing things about working at a huge company is the company never just does one thing, right? Like Microsoft just does everything in the tech world. They're an operating system company. They're a software company. They have M365. They have the cloud computing platform of Azure. And then there's Xbox, which is like its own whole company within a company. And so what was really nice was spending time at that company allowed me to, even though I was mainly working in sort of one area, I was still getting to get exposed to the different areas of the company. And there's sort of different approaches towards development and building things. And it is really different, right? Like when I worked with Xbox for a while on some very specific projects, and their whole approach to building is fundamentally very different to what it would be in, enterprise M365 or like enterprise Azure, because their customers are so different. And so if you're trying to always be building things that are for your customers, you have to align your development process with who it is you're building it for. And so that was really awesome. And so I got to learn a ton through exposure towards those different products and different platforms. And then I would say one thing that is true about a lot of large companies, Microsoft included, is that it's such a large machine with so many parts that for the machine to run at its best, every part has a pretty specific role. There's not that many generalists as a percentage of the overall company. People tend to have specific roles and specialties. And so you either arrive at a company like that with a specialty or you get one. And so I kind of got given one. Like while I was working there, I kind of found an area that I was interested in and that I was good at. And so that became the area that I spent most of my time working on. And that was a choice. It's not like you get siloed into a specific area or anything, but you do get the opportunity to really gain like a deep expertise in a specific area, because that's kind of the dynamic that allows for you to serve your team the best. So that was cool. And that's super different to what I have now, where I have to do everything all the time instead of just having one specialty.
I just wanted to say thank you guys so much for the amount of support you guys are giving this podcast. None of this would be possible without you guys. And if you guys like the video, please make sure to like and subscribe. It really helps me out, and it's completely free for you guys. If you want to support this podcast directly, please check out the Patreon link down below. It will help me directly, and it will help me bring higher levels of guests and improve the studio and really deliver the best content. And also over there, we have some unreleased content, podcasts. I've interviewed 2 people at the same time, and there's more content there with people from Toronto that I cannot be in person with. I do over the Zoom, and all the content's there. So please make sure to check it out. And thank you guys for watching.
Right. That's fascinating that everyone gets put into a specific role in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, and I think they're really good as a company about allowing you to find that role and sort of follow your interests. Just ultimately, if you're somebody who is managing a team or even if you're managing an entire organization, it's in your interest to allow people to work on the areas that are of most interest to them, right? Because that's where they're going to excel. That's where they're going to apply themselves the most. And that's where they're going to like really dive down the rabbit hole of like gaining deep expertise on a particular area. They're unlikely to do that with something that they don't actually find interesting. And so as a company, they were really good about allowing people to find what things were interesting to them, and then giving them the space to explore that and then be able to resurface with some valuable information or valuable insights.
So was there a reason you chose Microsoft, for example, over Google or Meta in that sense?
They gave me an offer. I had very early contact with Microsoft. So when I was in university, in my third year, between my second and third year, I had contact with Microsoft where they were running internships for university students. And so I ended up actually doing 2 internships with Microsoft. One was like a 12-week summer internship, and then I did a second one, which was, it made up like the second semester of my final year. I did like a 6-month internship with them. And so at the end of the internship, they had given me an offer to come back. And so that was sort of what led me down the path of going with them and not applying to every company under the sun. But I think the reason that I didn't apply for other places and that I was really happy to go with their offer was because of the culture that existed in that office. I'd say in general, they have a very strong company culture. They are like great to work with. They tend to reward people very fairly in terms of like being recognized for what you're doing. And then specifically the office that they have in Ireland had a very welcoming sort of culture, and they embraced work-life balance, and the people who are in positions of authority in that office are some of the best people I've ever worked under. They were very good at organizing the office and very good at making sure that like people were being recognized and the people were being balanced. It was one of those places where there was times where I would stay late. You know, I'd be working until like 7 or 8 p.m. or something, and a manager would walk by and ask like, "Why are you still here? Like, go home." You know, so it was the opposite of some of the corporate nightmares that you hear about. And so, and they were pretty upfront about that. Like they were very open about what their culture was, and I could see that from when I was doing internships. And so, when they gave me the offer, I totally jumped at it because it was great.
That's awesome. That's great. And I wonder, what are these corporate cultures that they were integrating into that office, for example? Like, do you have any specifics that they would maybe touch on and embrace in a sense?
The one that Microsoft is really famous for is growth mindset, which is not a sort of corporate tactic that they developed or anything. It's actually a technique that was popularized as part of a book that came out a few years previously that Satya fell in love with, and so then he brought it into the company. And growth mindset is essentially a instilling of a culture that embraces the idea that if you don't know something, you should never feel like you're in a position where you need to like pretend that you do know it, or that the idea of not knowing something is wrong or invaluable, that more represents an opportunity for you to be the next person who learns that thing, and in the process of learning it, bring your own value and bring your own perspectives. And so they were really good about instilling that. It was strong, and you could see that, you know, if someone made a mistake, if somebody shipped something that wasn't ready to be shipped, or you know, just generally erred in some way, that they weren't reprimanded for making the mistake. The only thing that you would ever be sort of held accountable for in a negative way would be if you like refused to learn from it. And so as long as every mistake was seen as an opportunity to learn, and that opportunity was taken, and so you were kind of growing as somebody who was moving through things and learning from all your experiences, then that was always seen as a positive journey and a good direction to be going in.
Do you try to incorporate that in your own company currently?
Yes. I do, certainly with the people that I work with. It's a particularly difficult thing to enforce on yourself. I struggle with the idea of, you know, shipping broken code myself and being okay with that. Like that's a technical example, right? Like as the software engineer. But now that I'm having to do other things, if I'm negotiating a contract with somebody, or if I'm in a sales call, or if I'm presenting something on stage, it's hard not to be hard on yourself. And so that is a process of learning for sure. But certainly with the people that I work with, I think that growth mindset fits really well with this idea that to be a effective manager of a company or an organization within a company, you should be treating the people that you work with like a sports team, right? You should be leveraging their strengths, allowing them to explore their interests. I think that, you know, when companies start talking about how like the employees are like family, it's a nice sentiment, but it only goes so far. The structure of a company is more akin to something like a sports team, where it is a performance-based situation. And like a sports team, the best way to monitor performance is not at an individual level, but it's at the team scale. And so certainly I think growth mindset fits really well with that, because there's a lot of times where it's difficult to measure somebody's performance at an individual level if the most impact that they're having is by bringing up the people around them. And so I think those ideas mesh very well together.
I would have to completely agree with you that it's truly a sports team and it's not individual. And some companies I see and I've been a part of, they really undermine that aspect and think it's an individual thing, which I guess Amazon has perfected in a sense.
Sure. Yeah. There was a lot of people. I don't know. I've never worked for Amazon. I don't know what their culture is like in different offices, but I know that
Microsoft.
I'm sorry?
Microsoft has perfected that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
What I was going to say about Amazon was in the Microsoft office in Dublin, we had a huge number of people who were coming over from Amazon and joining Microsoft because they were unhappy with at least the culture in the org that they were coming from. I don't know if that extends beyond that point, but certainly the people who were coming over were leaving, and in many cases taking a salary cut, because they just didn't like the conditions where they were coming from.
Wow.
Yeah. It makes a huge difference. Culture, it makes an enormous difference to, like, because that is, you spend most of your waking hours surrounded by the people that you work with, and surrounded in the atmosphere that you work in. And so if that is not right, it gets really difficult really fast.
Going back, why did you choose to study computer science? There were many fields. Why computer science?
I kind of ended up in computer science as an accident. In a weird way, looking back on it, I always should have studied computer science. Going through school, my strengths were in math and in physics and in applied math and these sorts of these subjects. And so I was always looking at things that were technical. The first course that really interested me that I was planning to apply for was theoretical physics. And I just had it in my mind that I was going to be a physicist. And then I met with a friend of mine just for a coffee, and he was like 3 or 4 years older than me. And he actually, no, maybe 5 or 6 years older than me, because he was doing his PhD at the time. He had studied physics, graduated, and was now doing a PhD in physics. And his recommendation was not don't do physics, but his recommendation was, now that he was doing physics kind of as a job, now that he was an actual physicist, most of the skills that he was needing to get better at, most of the skills that he was like needing to learn in order to be more efficient and more effective as a physicist, were computer science skills. It was all programming and simulations and being able to like run these kind of simulations and experiments at large scale, and being good at computer science was like a necessary component for him to be able to apply his physics. And so his recommendation to me was, don't study physics at an undergrad level, study computer science. And then if you're still wanting to do physics later, go and do a master's in physics or something. And then you have the skills to be able to apply it properly. And so it was literally that one conversation. And I was like, okay, I'll just do that then. And computer science had already been on my list, but it was maybe fourth. And so it went from fourth to first. And then in hindsight, the reason I say I always should have been studying computer science is because really my passion has always been for making things. Like I do a lot of woodworking, I make furniture. Like I've like, this is just like what I do in my free time. Is I always just like the process of designing something and then making that thing real, and sort of bringing it into the world. And in many cases, I'll make things for other people and just like give them away, because it's like a hobby, right? It's just it's enjoying the process of designing something and then building it. And so computer science is a really interesting combination of being able to do that sort of creative process, but in a technical field.
Yes, definitely. And it's great that you had conversations with others about the field that you were maybe trying to pursue to really get the full grasp of where you're headed.
Yeah. I was lucky that I had people in my social circle that were a little bit older than me. I knew them through sports. And so I used to do a lot of kayaking and canoeing. And so he was someone that I knew through that. And so through that avenue, I had access to people that were, 5 or 6 years ahead of me. And so were able to give me very relevant advice. It's always good to speak with people, but if you're speaking with other people who are at your own age, who are at your same life stage, more importantly, they don't have any sort of retrospective advice. They're just seeing the world the way that you're seeing it in many cases. And it can be difficult. It can be really difficult to take advice from like people of your parents' generation or your grandparents' generation, because they feel so it feels like there's a lot of space between the world that they went through at your age and the world that we're going through now. And in many cases, that's overblown, right? Like, that's probably not as true as it feels like it is. But it makes it harder to take advice from people of that generation, because you're like, oh, well, things were different then. But so if you have people who are like 5 or 6 years ahead of you, it doesn't feel like there's such a separation, but they do have retrospective advice. Like, they just went through this stuff. So that was super useful.
Yeah, it's important. Even the role of mentorship for us entrepreneurs, like talking to great founders of different companies and seeing how they went through, what advice they have. How has the role of mentorship played in your life so far?
So it's played a huge role. The way that I've liked to try to engage with mentorship is variety, being the spice of life. I haven't sought out an individual specific mentor that I want to work with over an extended period of time. And I think the reason for that is that I like the idea of getting as many different perspectives as you can. It can be very easy to sort of overtrain yourself in a certain way, where like if you're only getting one perspective of information, even if that information is extremely high quality, you can over adapt yourself to that information specifically. And then if your life doesn't turn out exactly the same way as the mentor and you end up kind of going on a different path, suddenly that information that you had is like less relevant than what you hoped it would be when you began. And so in my mind, it's always felt safer to kind of diversify and get as many different perspectives as I can. And so many of the people that I would consider to have been mentors for me over the past decade probably wouldn't have considered it a mentorship themselves. They wouldn't have thought of themselves as mentors to me, but I thought of it like that because I was constantly learning from them in some way. They had more experience in some specific field, or they had some life experiences that I thought were really interesting, and I'm just trying to learn as much as I can from that. And so that's been my own approach towards the idea of mentorship, is that everybody has something that you can learn from them. And so trying to, not in a sort of transaction extractory way, but rather in a like truly engaged, I want to learn more about you and your background sort of way. There's always something that you can get a better understanding of from other people's experiences.
This literally comes to my lifestyle in this podcast. I have so many great people.
What a segue.
Exactly. And I'm learning every single episode about different aspects, and it's fantastic. It's a dream life of mine, truly. Going back, so you worked for 5 years at an amazing company, I'd say. You seem to like it. Why that transition? So why did you choose to leave, I guess, comfortable life for something risky and something of your own with maybe higher rewards in the future?
For me personally, and I think everybody's going to have their own reasons for doing something like this, but for me, it comes back to the thing that gets me up in the morning, so to speak, is the process of making things. And it's true, like at Microsoft, I was making things in a very literal sense, but I was always drawn towards working on the projects that allowed me to have the most creative input and the most sort of freedom and choice over not just what we were building, but how we were building it, and sort of being able to implement a vision from start to finish. The closer that I could get to that, the more rewarding and purposeful the work felt to me. And so starting my own company and building my own things has always been something that was of, interest to me philosophically. And I guess the reason to do it now, there was a few different things that felt like the right time. Ultimately, Voxmail as a product was the thing that made me decide like now is the right moment to do this. It was an idea that my co-founder and I had. that we worked on in the evenings and the weekends for a few months. And then we got to a place where we started to feel really good about what we were building. And what we were building was aligning very closely with a lot of the feedback that we were getting from people that we were speaking with, some of like the potential customers and businesses and things like that. And things started to line up in a way where we got excited about it, and we decided, okay, I think now's the moment. The idea of starting a company and having that freedom to create something, all the way from vision through to implementation and execution, is something that my co-founder and I have been speaking about since we were in college together. And so in the backs of our minds, it's always been something that like I've known he's interested in, he's known I've been interested in it. And so it really was, in many ways for us, an aspect of just when was the timing going to be right. And the timing's never going to be perfect. But in this particular case, the thing that kind of pushed it over the edge was that we started to get very excited about what we were building. More excited about, like, we've built many things. We've worked on projects since we've known each other, basically. And this was the first time we were working on something, and we were like, no, okay, this is a company.
There's something here.
Yeah.
For people that don't know, can you just briefly explain what your company does?
For sure. So Voxmail is a customer support contact tool. So it's a piece of software that lives on a business's website with the goal that it allows them to be as contactable as possible by their customers. If somebody has a question, if somebody has an issue, they can raise it using this piece of software. And on the user side, the flow is designed to be as simple as possible and as low friction and low interaction as possible, to keep it as close as possible to a normal conversation. And then on the business side, the goal is to structure the information that they're getting in such a way that it makes their lives as easy and simple and as efficient as possible. And so ultimately, from a technical perspective, what's happening is we're using a lot of the same technologies that would go into building something like a chatbot, but applying them in a totally different way. As somebody who, like most people, has had customer support experiences where I've had an issue with a company where, I bought something and it never arrived, or it came and it was the wrong size, or it was broken, or, whatever number of issues. And you have to contact the company and get it resolved. The last thing that I want to do in that moment when I'm feeling frustrated is to talk to a bot, right? I want to feel like a human's actually hearing what I have to say. And I also don't want to wait on hold for 45 minutes before I get to talk to somebody. So that was ultimately, that frustration was the kernel that was the beginning of us starting to build Voxmail. And so the user flow is that from the business's website, you can leave a message, either as a voice message, where you just say whatever it is that you need to say, or you can type it out if you prefer, and you click send, and then that's you done. So you don't have to wait on hold or anything like that. It's a very simple, very low friction flow. But then where the tech comes in is as the message is in transit to the business. Let's say you leave a voice message. Our tech stack will do things like language recognition on what language it is that you're speaking. It will transcribe everything into text, translate it into the business's language, and then do things like summarization and sentiment analysis, and package up everything in an email that gets sent to the business. And so when the business receives it, it's a very easy to parse email that they can just hit reply to. And so the sort of processing overhead is way lower than if they were to have to pick up their landline and listen to all the voicemails that have been left over the last 12 hours. They're not having to manually transcribe things out. And so it makes things really easy for businesses to be able to deal with things efficiently and in batches. If you have 5 messages from the last, from overnight since you wrapped up shop the day before or something, you can process all those messages in just a couple of minutes.
So, okay, there's a lot to unpack here. I'm just going to be a devil's advocate for a second.
Please.
So someone leaves a voice message, but how do you make sure that voice message gets accurately processed to the email? what's your percentage? How do you go about like making sure the accuracy is there for different languages? You guys have different languages?
So right now we support 72 languages. And so the 72 like most spoken languages.
Yeah, pretty much covers like I think like over 95, like
Yeah.
very big percentage of population. Yeah, so I've spoke to him 2 days ago in the event and used language models. And how does that work? How does the accuracy come about?
So you're totally right. In order for this to work, both the business and the customers need to have a sense of trust in the system that it's working correctly. One thing that I've always hated about, in general, I think like contact forms are actually kind of slept on as a great solution. I think they're very efficient and they work very well for customers and businesses. But one thing that I hate about using them is that a lot of the time when you use a contact form on a website and you click send, it's like it's just gone and you don't get any sort of receipt. Right? Very often they won't even send you like an email to let you know that it's been sent or something. And that has a huge impact on my sensation of like, is someone actually going to receive it? Is it going to go anywhere? And so I think to answer your question, I think there's two things that you have to solve. One is technical accuracy, and then the other is transparency, so that like both sides are sort of aware of what's happening and what stage things are at. And so on the technical accuracy side, we use the most recent technologies that we can. We use a combination of in-house and public models. In some cases, we have multiple models running on things that are sort of checking each other's work. And everything is kept modular, right? So the process of running sentiment analysis is its own process. The process of running translation is its own process. The process of running transcription is its own process. And so that allows us to be able to update the models that are doing those things modularly. If we get a better way to be able to do sentiment analysis, we can update that process without affecting the other ones. And so you're never having to kind of take a hit in one area in order to improve in another by treating everything as its own. And so from a technical accuracy perspective, that's really ultimately the goal, is just use the best solutions that you can for every dedicated process that you're doing, maintaining context through them all, and then sort of package up everything right at the very end. And then from a transparency side, it's a very simple flow, but it seems to be a very useful way to be able to kind of validate that what is being sent encompasses the whole message. So when a user sends a message to a business and the business receives that as an email, the user is also CC'd on that email. So it creates a thread between the business and the customer where the customer's query is right at the top of that thread. And so that allows for, firstly, validation, where if you say something and if it does pick it up wrong and you can see that the transcription is off in some way, you can see it. You have the opportunity to correct it in the thread. But it also acts as a receipt. You as a user know that this has been sent, you know who it's been sent to. And if you don't hear back from the business in a reasonable amount of time, you can do things like ping them, right? Like you can message them on that thread. Now you have a channel of communication between you and the business that is established before you even get a response. And then finally, if you send a voice message, for example, the audio message, the actual MP3 file of you speaking, is included in the email as well. And so if there's something about the transcript in the email that you're not happy with or seems kind of funky, you as a human can still listen to the audio message. And in fact, that's one of the most important aspects of what we're trying to do, is make sure that as somebody who is experiencing an issue or is having to reach out to a business with a problem or a question, that first and foremost, before we even talk about getting a resolution, you feel like you are at least being listened to, that there is somebody hearing the problem that you're having. And so that very literal process of being listened to and having the audio file there has been something that's very important to us from the beginning, because that kind of human connection and that human empathy and the ability for a company to be able to empathize with the issue that a customer is having is way stronger if you can hear them saying it in their own voice rather than just seeing the black and white text. Having the combination of two allows it to be more efficient and more scalable. And transcribing voice messages is very important for businesses because it makes them keyword searchable, right? Like in your email inbox, if all you have is MP3 files, there's no way for you to search for a thing that was a month ago. But if everything is transcribed and you know that there was an issue a month ago about a yellow t-shirt, you can look up yellow t-shirt in your email inbox and now you can find that message very easily. But I think having both is super important, both for validation, but also for the kind of empathic connection.
That's awesome. I mean, you've truly thought it through, and I can see that. But another thing, so how do you structure, for example, same issues coming to the company multiple times, right?
Yeah.
Is there structure manner that kind of fits certain messages into certain categories and just like organizes these issues for them?
Right. So I guess there's two layers to that. One is if you're a company that has multiple inboxes that deal with different things, if you have a marketing @ and a customer support @ and a technical support @ in different email addresses, one of the layers of processing that we have is you provide that sort of mapping of what email addresses it is that your company has and what keywords they're each associated with. And then based on the content of the message, we route to the correct inbox automatically. A lot of businesses don't like to have their email addresses surfaced on their website. So because they'll get scraped and get spam, right? And so one of the nice things about Voxmail is at no point in the actual user flow of them clicking through the tool is the email address of the company like exposed. So it can't be scraped. It's only on the back end that we do that routing. And so what that allows us to do is allow a company that has 20 different email addresses to be able to get things routed to the correct email addresses based on the content without ever having to give the user all the email addresses that they have. So that's super nice. And then when it comes to the processing, so we process messages individually and we extract things like, urgency and sentiment and things like that, like some metadata about the issue that's involved. And we don't store the actual customer messages on our servers or anything like that. That's actually one of the reasons we use email, is so that the security that the business requires that they sort of maintain their email servers at, that's where all the information is being stored. And so it's automatically compliant with whatever their data requirements are. But we are able to, from that metadata that we've extracted, we're able to surface sort of like a word cloud of common issues that businesses are having. So like you say, right, in a given month or in a given space of 6 months, it might be that a business is actually seeing the same issue over and over and over again. And it, in many cases, would be a lot cheaper for them to fix that issue than for them to deal with the customer support that's being generated because of that issue. So by surfacing that back to businesses and saying, hey, 30% of all the customer support that you dealt with in the last 6 months was actually because this button on your website is broken. Now they get to optimize and reduce their costs by seeing what these recurring issues are and being able to kind of find them faster than, because if you have a lot of different customer support agents, if you've got different people who are dealing with these issues, it can be difficult to track trends, right? Because person A dealt with it on this day, person B dealt with it on another day. It doesn't feel like a trend until you can actually meta-analyze all of the requests that you've gotten over a given period of time. And so that's like another layer of analysis that we do, and then give like a monthly newsletter back to the businesses so that they have those business insights.
Yes, that's what I was looking for, and you guys do that. So when was this company originated? It's only a year, if I'm right.
Yeah, well, it's kind of less than a year. I mean,
December, correct?
December is when I left Microsoft. And so this is something where we had begun ideating and sort of playing around with ideas and talking about it prior to that. And then we really started building immediately when I left Microsoft. And so the kind of back half of December last year and the first few months of this year were engineering heavy. And then we launched to, we worked with a number of companies while we were building it as design partners. So we were getting feedback, asking questions, because like I said earlier, the kind of kernel that this all began with was a frustration on the user side. right? This was as somebody who has had to deal with companies and had customer support requests that didn't go the way I wanted them to and were sort of frustrating experiences. That was where the desire of this came from. But ultimately, if you're going to make this into a product and a business, of course you want to serve those customers, but they're not the people who are buying it. And so you need to make sure that you're also not just serving the customers of businesses, but also your customers, which are the businesses. And so we had to make sure that we had a very firm idea of what the optimal user experience would be, because we were users, and so we had a strong starting point. And of course, we did a lot of additional user testing after that fact, but at least our own perspectives were valid. When it came to what does the business need, how do we best solve what their headaches are? We needed to get feedback while we were building. And so we worked with a number of businesses to get that feedback while we were building. And so we launched to those businesses at the end of March this year. And then we were more generally available throughout April and May.
So beta testing.
Yeah, I don't like to think of it as beta testing because it was in production and their customers aren't going to be aware that it's in beta, right? So if a real customer of theirs is using it while it's in beta, it still has to work because the customer doesn't care that it's in beta. They're the person whose order didn't get shipped. And so we had to be very careful about making sure that any features that were sort of in beta were business facing only. And we didn't want to launch anything that was going to be customer facing or consumer facing until it was kind of past a beta phase. We had to do a lot of internal testing to validate those things.
Yeah, this is very important. And for any business that deals with customers, they have to really consider that because customers don't really care, right? And you have to accommodate that even from the beta, as we talk about. That's a good point. That's a very interesting point. All right, let's go back to some structured questions and then we'll dive back to what we have there.
I'll continue to derail you as we go. I'm going to send us off on every tangent I can.
Let's do it. I'm ready. Okay, so what motivated your shift from hardware engineering to software development?
So yeah, that was before I was in college. I had a kind of itty bitty startup that I ran when I was 16, 17, called Astrum Tech. It was a ton of fun. And yeah, I was working on designing and building computer systems, both for consumers and for enterprise. It started off building gaming rigs for first friends, then started to gain a little bit of traction through building for friends, and then moved on to building for like Twitch streamers who wanted like big fancy PCs with lights everywhere, but where they still needed to actually work because like they needed high frame rates to play games because that was their living, right? They were Twitch streaming. And so then from there, through the Twitch streaming route, we started working with people who were video editing and doing, people who were YouTubers were doing like small scale video editing studios, let's say, where they might have been video editors for contract. And we needed to build them workstations to be able to do video editing. And then from there, moving towards larger companies that were, architecture firms, engineering firms, people who running, simulations or rendering out like architectural designs and things like that, or engineering companies. And so we weren't designing or building any custom components for computers. We were designing the overall systems. And so the problem that I was trying to solve initially, at least for consumers, and it turned out to be a bigger problem than I thought for enterprises as well, was if you go into like a Best Buy or the Irish equivalent, it experiences this problem even more than something with Best Buy because it's a much smaller store and has fewer options inside. If you're going in as somebody who, plays AAA titles, but you don't do any, video rendering or image editing or something like that, your needs are different, right? Games mostly run on single core or a small number of cores. And so having a high clock speed on a single core is more important than having like 16 cores at a low clock speed. Whereas if you're working like as a video editing professional, where you need more of a workstation, running with something that has like half the clock speed but has 32 cores, like some kind of Xeon style processor, was going to make way more sense for you, even though it was terrible at gaming. And so if you went into like a big box store, you didn't have this kind of you didn't have these configurations that were designed specifically for things. And what we were really offering was working directly with people, learning what their actual needs were, what they were going to be using the computer for, and then for within the budget that they had set, designing the thing that was the best at the thing that they were going to be doing. And that was fundamentally the whole process. And there's a lot of companies that do that. We weren't really doing anything super unique, but we were doing it in a place that was underserved by those companies. There weren't many places in Ireland where you could get that kind of thing. And a lot of the companies who did say ship to Ireland were, they might have been taking advantage of the fact that it was an underserved market and they were too expensive. So I did that toward the end of like high school before I went to college. And that was my first foray into like really deep diving on either software or hardware. Before I went to university, I never wrote a line of code. I didn't know what code looked like. And so hardware had been my only sort of exposure to like professional technical work with computer systems. And then we already spoke about how I ended up in software, but yeah, that was how I started.
So you're saying is that with your current co-founder?
No, it was with a bunch of other guys that I went to high school with. There was 2 or 3 of my friends who were, again, a little bit ahead of me in all of like in diving down the rabbit hole of like, what does it mean to learn how to build your own computer, and what does it mean to be able to understand and compare the technical differences of all the different components that go into a PC. And so it started with a friend of mine who had built his own PC and then helped me build mine. And in the process of building my own, I realized that there was an element of the research aspect that I found really fascinating. And I really enjoyed that sort of decision-making process of like picking every component for it to have like a purpose and for it to fit the budget and the use case as best as possible, and the kind of constant balancing act of like, well, if I take this, then I have to downgrade this and I can upgrade it. And just that balancing act of being able to design something that worked as optimally as possible within the constraints that were there was really fun. And so I just did it more and more and more and more. And like I say, it kind of grew out of something super organic, which was that I wanted to build my own gaming PC because there wasn't like a reasonable and cheap way for me to be able to buy one off the shelf. And it turned out that there was a bunch of people around me who were in the same boat. And so I was able to help them, and then just slowly over time turned that into a job.
Boom. So you're a serial entrepreneur in a sense.
I guess technically on paper. It doesn't feel that way. It's been a long time since I was working on the hardware computer systems, and I never took the step to be able to make that my full-time role. I never wanted that to be a company that required more time than what I had. And so I worked on it for a year and a half. It did well within that space of time. And towards the end, it was doing well enough that if I had decided to, I probably could have gone into making that a full-time role and turning it into a real company that would then take on employees and things like that in the future. But I never strongly considered that versus going to university. Like that was always a kind of hard stop for me. And so I never took the step to make it into, to take the next step and turn it into something bigger. I basically just kept it at what I could manage myself and what my friends were contributing. And so I took the minimum necessary steps in terms of it being like it was a registered company, and we had a trading name and a website and all these kinds of things. Like we had the rudiments of a business, but never then actually went far enough to turn it into a real company.
Right. I'm trying to get at is your parents. Are they entrepreneurs or aren't they in the technology realm? How did you get this kind of mindset to be where you are currently?
It's interesting. I do think that my parents had a huge impact on me landing where I am now, but they're not in the technical realm, and they're not entrepreneurs in the traditional sense. They're small business owners. My father is a stonemason. He's a terrazzo specialist who's in construction. He does like marble, floors and countertops and bathtubs and these kinds of things. He's more recently started working with a lot of artists, and so he's doing like sculptures for museums and things like that. And so the background for me is a combination of construction and craft, and also coming from a family that worked and ran a small like family business with like a small number of employees, but it was in many ways very similar to a startup in that the company was sufficiently small that like both my parents had to wear 15 different hats and do a bunch of different things. Like they were the manager, they were the person answering the phones, they were customer support, they were making all the decisions, they were payroll, they were accounting. And then my dad was like physically on site doing construction and craft, like he's a master craftsperson. And so that idea of really owning your vision and like knowing what it is that you want to build, knowing what it is that you want your company to be, and then implementing like every part of that was something that I grew up with. And so that, I think, has been a part of the draw towards the idea of being an entrepreneur, is really owning the vision and knowing that if you build something and if you ship it and if it goes well, great, you get to take credit for that. It's you did it right, congratulations. But also that if it fails, you get to own that failure too. And there's no sidestepping it. There's no like, oh well, it was his fault, or it was something other than me. It was like you own the successes and the failures fully, which is really tough at times, but it's also very rewarding. I think both owning successes and failures is rewarding in a different sense. But I think that growing up around that really made me more comfortable with the idea of that, because it is scary.
This sense of accountability to the fullest extent that you're talking about is very important for any founder, really, and it seems to have been a huge part and a help driven for you to be where you are, kind of. So that's awesome.
Yeah, it's something that my co-founder and I've spoken about a lot recently, because we recently had our first instance of someone that we work with who was working with us part-time, left his other job and is now working for us full-time. And that's a very specific process to have happen. That's very scary, because now there's a shift of responsibility, and you, particularly as a founder, you have to fully take that on board and bake that into virtually every decision that you make. And that responsibility will, that'll compound over time, and there'll be more people that are in that same situation where when I'm making a decision about something or when I'm negotiating a contract, it's not for me now, it's for me and the people that I work with, and for their families, and there's a whole chain of dependency that exists there now. And so the accountability is not just on you as an individual, but you're representing accountability for a large number of people. And so you can never ignore that. Like, it always has to be somewhere in your mind.
That's awesome that you're bringing this up, and you're having that in the back of your mind, because there's some founders that I don't know, I want to say like these days they just care about profit and like kind of just too corporate. But if you have that person to person feel with your employees, and especially in a small company, it makes more sense. But like something Microsoft you mentioned, that was awesome. So this is having that in a large scale really helps your company grow and be more of a sports team, as you said.
Sure. And to go back to your question about my parents and the way that they ran their company, and my co-founder is actually in the same boat here, where his parents were also involved with small businesses and family-run businesses and things like that. And so we have a similar sort of perspective on what it is to run a business. And in some ways, our perspective feels a little bit archaic, because we've spoken with a number of people who have, sometimes the first question that we get asked when we speak with another founder or with a VC is like, well, what's your exit strategy? And I understand where they're coming from, but my exit strategy is to have run a good company, and retire at age 65, right? Like I'm not trying to, and I want to be careful, because I'm not trying to make it out that I'm throwing shade at people who want to build something up to the point where it gets bought and then they step away from it or whatever. There's definitely instances where that can be a perfectly effective way to bring something new into the world. But when we were starting to structure the company and starting to figure out like what the organizational strategy was going to be, how we were going to organize our finances, how we were going to invest in the company in terms of like engineering versus marketing versus scaling up the number of employees and all these things, our perspective has always been on just how to build a sustainable and like company with strong foundations. It's never been how can we raise the perceived value of our company as fast as possible so that we can like exit, and some VC takes over or we get bought out or something. And I think a lot of that mindset comes from like my parents' business has been in business for 50 years. And so, if you ask them what their exit strategy is, they wouldn't understand the question. And so that's kind of where my mind has typically been when it comes to structuring the company as well.
That's awesome, and something that you don't hear that often anymore. Honestly, this is maybe a traditional way of thinking, and now we know that Boxmel and Cade Ryan will be together for many
Forever.
Exactly. Till he can maybe no longer, he's like the 80s, 90s, and he's like, okay, it's time maybe. But until then, you guys are together forever. How do you feel about Claude AI?
Specifically Claude and Anthropic's offerings?
Yes, yeah, they're a very trending topic, and they've done a bunch of great stuff. And, they work with Cursor and other organizations, and I think they will be a big key role of this race, this AI race to AGI or AGI. I don't want to call it like a specific entity, but it will be a gradual step to that. How do you feel about them and their structure and approach?
It's an interesting topic, right? Because it's so fast moving in terms of what models are available, what interaction patterns are being used in order for people to use these things as tools. These things are changing so quickly that I actively try to avoid making any sort of grand claims about where things will be at any point in time in the future, because something could get released next week that totally changes the way that these things integrate with us and our workflows and our lives in general. What I will say is, as a software engineer, and that being one of the industries that is engaging most with the kind of release of new models and new interaction patterns, Claude is my model of choice for software engineering. And the reason for that, there's two. Firstly, right now, their most recent model is Sonnet 3.5, and there's like a new version of Sonnet 3.5, and I find that to be the most reliable model for programming right now. O1 Mini and Preview are also really good, but they have limitations in terms of you can't send them images. They don't have access to links and the internet, and so those models can't be properly reviewed yet in comparison to things like 4.0 or Sonnet 3.5. But the main reason that I use Claude is because what I've found is that in order to be able to utilize an AI model as a software engineer most effectively, it's a process of iteration. And so I've seen lots of demos where people will throw a large, complex problem at a model and let the model do the whole thing as a sort of demo of just how advanced the model is. That's very impressive. But in real world terms, that's almost never how I'm interacting with these things when it comes to writing code. It's very atomic, modular functions, just basic grunt work that have very well-established patterns, but where using an AI model to help things move faster I find that's the most reliable way to do it, because it's incredibly rare that if your prompt is very atomic and very specific, it's rare that it will be wrong. Like the output that you get is very high quality, because there's very little room for ambiguity in what you're looking for. And Claude was, I believe, the first platform to release an artifact model, where when it was responding to you, that you would get this sort of split screen view where you would get all of the different files that are being modified as you're working, and you can actually review the different files separately rather than them just being embedded in the sort of chat output. And I think that artifact model made an enormous difference to the sort of how you could integrate Claude into your workflow. There are things like GitHub Copilot or �𝐶𝐄𝐑, which act as they're like Visual Studio Code like extensions that try to bring the AI model even more into your workflow. But I don't think they're perfect yet. 𝐿𝐾ode is my favorite, I'll say that. But so if I am going to a separate resource where if I'm like split screening two applications for them to be sort of bouncing between each other, having the artifact model there as a way for me to review all the different files that are being modified and be able to request specific modifications to a specific file, and having that kind of file system almost within the artifact, that made integrating it into my workflow way more efficient. And what I think that represents is that it's at this moment in time, because the flagship models from Anthropic, from OpenAI, Gemini, they've gotten good enough at this point where I think the most important thing is not the model that's being used under the hood, but it's the interaction patterns of how are you integrating this? Like, what does it look like for you as a human to be able to take this tool and now bake it into this existing workflow that you have? And so that's the area that I'm most interested in and most excited about going forward. And I think that that's the area that Claude has been nailing. There's the GPT-4o with Canvas is in preview or in beta, which is sort of their artifact model. And there's a few other people who are working on various sort of canvases and ways to allow you to bring similar experiences into other applications. And so I'm very excited about what those look like going forward. But right now, I think Claude is probably, like, as of November 19th or whatever date it is today, I think Claude is probably doing it the best.
I definitely have to agree. And I'm currently fourth year computer science, right? And I have many talks with my friends and my classmates, and we talk about someone, for example, in their first year of computer science, is it worth it for them to pursue this? Because as Elon Musk famously said, in the next 5 years, all cognitive tasks will be replaced by AI. So what is your view on that? And would you recommend someone maybe finishing high school or an early university to really pursue this path? And what's your vision on that?
So as both the models and the interaction patterns become more advanced over time, right? Like I said, I'm reluctant to talk about what things are going to be like in 4 years. But if we try to speculate what they might be like, it's true that, so today, the person who is the best equipped to be able to integrate some kind of LLM into their software engineering workflow is a good software engineer, right? Because you have the ability to be able to quickly and effectively break down the problem into smaller problems and then have those small problems be solved individually for you. And that's a sort of generalization of what it looks like, but that is an example of how to integrate it in a way that is generally pretty helpful. Somebody who doesn't know how to program is going to struggle with that because they're not as well trained at breaking down the problem into smaller problems. That will change over time, right? The ability for larger problems to get broken down for you will almost certainly become an interaction pattern that people begin to have with AI models. And I think the question just becomes then, like, there has to be a human interaction at some point, right? Even if it's all the way abstracted as somebody just describing a thing that they want. I wish I had an app that such and such, right? And then everything just gets made for you. That, I imagine, will become technically feasible within the next 4 or 5 years. But it's not clear to me that even when that becomes technically feasible, that will be the most effective way to design and build experiences. I think that if you abstract it too far and the human involvement becomes too kind of surface level, you lose too much of the sort of perspective of who your users are going to be. All right, it's great having things that are going to help you execute your vision. I'm less convinced that it's going to be as useful to offload what is the vision. I still think that there still needs to be a layer of human cognition that is not so far abstracted from the implementation that it represents the people who are actually going to like use that experience once it's built and shipped. And so we are probably approaching a point in the not too distant future where the technical feasibility of how to build things allows for a wider variety of options about how you build things. But it's not entirely clear to me that taking humans out of the equation is going to be like the best way to build it, or removing them as much as possible is going to be the best way to build it. And so I disagree with Elon Musk. At least I think I do. And so that doesn't answer your question specifically of like, should someone still go and study computer science? That's a hard question to answer because it depends on what you're trying to get out of it. I think it's going to depend on computer science degrees are going to need to, in the structure of what they're teaching, are going to need to move quite quickly. I think it's really good that people who study computer science today understand what it's like to break down a large problem into lots of smaller problems and then execute on those sort of atomic problems and then see that come together into a larger overall solution or experience, right? I think that is fundamentally a really important process in design and engineering. And I think that that's not something that I was good at or had experience with coming out of high school, right? That was something that I did learn at university. But at the same time, when I studied computer science, we were still studying compiler design, right? And like that as a field hasn't moved along since the mid 1970s in big ways. And the guy who was teaching it had been teaching it since the 1970s, right? So the curriculum just hadn't adapted at all. And so I do think that there's still a ton of value to going to like an institution and learning. But I do think that those institutions need to adapt pretty fast because the changes that we're seeing in what it means to be a software engineer, those changes are happening more rapidly now than maybe they ever have before.
It seems that the graph of changes is just going just faster and faster up. And the trends that we've seen with institutions is that they are not the fastest at changing their curriculum. So I personally want to push back a little bit. I would think that either there's a fundamental change that happens, or these gaps will be so far apart that that value will not be feasible. But if that gap is narrowed, as you said, then that would be fantastic. And I would say that it'd be worth it. But I would have to say that if I had a kid and he came up to me and he was like, "Father, I love computer science, I'd want to go through it," I would say maybe some third-party option that you could take courses on, and not like a 4-year institution, but some couple years that just gets you the base vision and how to break down problems. And I think that'd be a more feasible way currently, but I guess we'll have to wait and see.
We will see. I think it will be a matter of like a Darwin style adapt or die, right? Like what's great about it is that this is an opportunity for academic institutions to get a little bit reshuffled in terms of where can you get the best education, right? Particularly as somebody who is looking to be a software engineer, somebody who's looking to study computer science, this is an opportunity for like newer, less traditional institutions to become the most sought after or the most effective place to learn those things. And that's a particularly great thing in countries where education is crazy expensive. I'm lucky enough to come from a country where third level education is basically free. And there are some countries in Europe where it is literally free, like where it's completely free. The government just covers it. There's plenty of places like that. And so in places where there's not as many financial barriers to education, it's less of an issue for sure. But yeah, like if you think of like a difference that this could make in somewhere like the US, where now to be a great software engineer, to be a great computer scientist means not going to MIT, not going to Harvard, not going to, an Ivy League school, but instead going to somewhere that is actually financially accessible. I think that's a great thing, right? That would be that's a positive move in general, because now if it's more financially accessible, you get more people getting high level education, and you get more diversity, you get more perspectives on things, and that's just going to lead to like a creative boom in the industry, because you get a wider variety of people coming in, so that's an opportunity for this to have a great outcome, I think.
100%. Yeah, you've touched on great things here. Just going back, so you've moved from a European country, Ireland, to here about 2 years ago. What are some views that you see are different in Europe? What do you admire from there, and what do you admire from here? How do they contrast in various ways that you've interacted with them?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I lived in Ireland pretty much my whole life, but half my family, or not quite half in numbers, but one side of my family is from the US. And so I sort of had exposure to both growing up, which is fantastic, because I think there are a lot of differences. I mean, I would say something that I do love about a lot of European countries is you get the vibe that the country has like been around for a long time, and so a lot of the cultural aspects of those countries are rooted in really interesting histories, and their culture showcases a really interesting perspective on the world, or it showcases a way of life that might not be around anymore, but is preserved through, cultural things that you can trace back for thousands of years sometimes. And I love that, right? Like that's certainly true about the Irish. There's lots of ties to Irish, folklore and stories that are still like they're things that are present in Irish culture today that you can trace back to historical events that took place, maybe 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, which is incredible, and I love that. And then I think on the flip side, maybe for exactly the same reason, in a place like the US, which has sort of had this really rapid, like the kind of Western culture of the US, let's say, their own particular brand of like Americanism, is something that rapidly developed over the course of the last 400 years or so, and is still rapidly developing. It's changing all the time. And so almost like how children are way more playful than adults, I think that American culture can be a lot more playful than European culture. And I think that's a really positive thing. I think there's a lot more space for creativity and self-expression. I think that there's a lot more spaces, both in the US and in Canada, for people to, to express themselves artistically or creatively, and to not feel as much sort of social pressure around what that means. I think that's a really cool thing because it allows more people to kind of be more different and be more themselves. And that's one of the things that I've always liked about coming to anywhere in North America. I think is there's elements of that are way more prevalent than most places that I'm familiar with in Europe anyway. Like I had a lot of family that was living in Los Angeles, and so when I was a teenager I would go to LA every couple of years to visit them, and that was like, it was a stark reminder of what it's like to be in a place that has so many avenues for self-expression. Los Angeles is famous for it, but I think that in general a lot of US cities are way better at that than European cities.
So a natural question coming out of that is that, will you stay here forever, or do you have plans of going back? How do you feel about that?
When my partner and I moved here, we originally planned on staying for like 2 to 3 years. We have really liked it here, and so we're certainly going to see out the 3 years. However, we've kind of structured our lives in a way that makes it a lot easier for us to move back to Europe. And so I probably will move back, certainly with having the company in Europe. I have to go back at some point. And it just makes a lot of logistical sense for me to be a lot closer to where we are running things. So yeah, I think I probably won't stay here forever, but it's more of a structural thing than anything else. I really do like it here.
That's awesome. Well, I would love to visit you there. Well, forklift, beers, whatever.
Anytime.
Awesome. Okay, let's have some lighthearted questions.
Okay.
What's the biggest thing you do for fun?
The biggest thing I do?
The biggest thing you do for fun. I think you touched on that. You're creating, woodworking and just creating things. But maybe just like any favorite sports team or anything like that. Maybe getting to the fun side of you.
I do improvised theater, which is fun.
Whoa.
Some improv. Yeah, I've recently started. I've only been doing it less than a year. But that's a ton of fun. Yeah, that's one of the avenues of self-expression that I found in Vancouver.
That's awesome.
That's a ton of fun. Yeah, that's a great, talk about a great group of people. They rule. They're very, it's been a lot of fun because it's a space to be very playful and just kind of mess around in a way that is a performance, right? It's not sort of like, I think play for the sake of play is wonderful, but it's particularly difficult to do that as an adult. You kind of grow out of this idea of playing for the sake of play, and so you then risk you risk the possibility of not playing at all. And I think that through being playful and that leading me to being creative, that's how some of the best ideas come around. And so
100%. Just letting it go sometimes and just flow. And that's where you can just reshuffle ideas. Where can we find that? So I'm going to link one down below if you have a video or any channel or anything, so people maybe watch what you have.
I don't have videos, but for people who are in Vancouver who want to check out some improv, I work most with instant theater. And so you can check out instant theater.
When is your next show?
November 28th.
Okay, I'll have a ticket list down below. I'll probably be there. That's awesome. That's great. I love that you can be so technical on one side and just have a totally different avenue. It's all about like balance of different paths and perspectives on life. And that's how I think a complete structured human being comes out, not just being one-sided.
Right. No, for sure. And it's actually really cool to see, because a lot of the people that I know through that avenue are also technical people. So it's quite a regular thing, I think, for people who work in a technical field or an engineering field to then seek out this avenue of like something totally different. And so there's a lot of people there who are coming from that similar background and there for the same reasons, which is great.
That's funny because I play semi-professional badminton, and over there, I think 90% of players are computer scientists as well, Java developers and blah, blah, blah. So it's awesome how, we can just find some common grounds between our communities. And
Totally.
on a more maybe, I guess you haven't been here for a while, but I would like to say, how do you think the U.S. election now will impact your business/life?
Well, I don't know. My biggest concern coming up to this, I did follow the election closely. Being in North America, kind of a lot of Canadians will follow it. And even Ireland's economy is very closely tied to the US economy. And so, and then with family in the US, I've always followed these things. I guess coming after the last one and now arriving at this one, what I had really hoped to see was that it would just go back to at least running smoothly, and that like the process of democracy would continue to function. And it did. Whether no matter which way people voted as individuals, the process of a vote taking place, there being a decisive outcome, and there being a transfer of power to that outcome, that worked. And I think that was from a business perspective, at least, that was the biggest concern that I had, was if you don't have that, it's very difficult to arrive at any kind of stability. And so based on the election from 4 years ago and the way that sort of ran around January, I was concerned that process of there being increasing instability would kind of increase over time. But it seems like this time it ran the way it usually runs, which is good. And I'm happy as well that, from a more technical perspective, that the Electoral College and the popular vote were in line with each other, at least. Because it always sucks when you see that the popular vote went one way, but then the sort of intricacies of how the US run their Electoral College makes a different decision. That sucks, because it means that like a minority of people voted for the leader, which is not great. And so, yeah, between those two things, I'm not super concerned about it from a business perspective. And yeah, on a personal level, I'm not a US citizen, so I don't get a vote.
I agree. I definitely agree with you that it ran more smoothly, and it's great to see that. It's really great to see that, and we can just leave it at that.
Sure. Keep it linked that way.
Okay, so we're going to the last section, which is some philosophical questions.
Okay.
What challenges you? I think you've touched on that. As a founder, you have a high sense of accountability, and it's kind of hard to be easy on yourself. But maybe different avenues of challenges you can touch on for yourself.
I mean, one thing that actually I'm happy to have seen, it gets spoken about at events like the one that we met at. It gets spoken about within circles of founders, but not something that gets spoken about outside of those circles a lot, which is being a founder and starting a company is very lonely. To do it completely on your own, I can't even imagine how difficult it would be. You begin to realize that having a co-founder and the kind of process of collaborating with that co-founder throughout the beginning of starting a business is as much a sort of logistical and pragmatic thing as it is a social thing. Like, you just need another human to be able to bounce ideas off of and be able to talk to and be able to tell that you had a bad day. You know, it can be the really simple stuff that kind of wears people down. And so, yeah, that's something that that I definitely struggle with it, and I think that a lot of people do. And I'm happy to see that it is actually being spoken about within circles of founders, where everybody's like, man, it's tough here. Like, really trying to build something. It's like this, theoretically noble endeavor, but like there's not a lot of support systems for it.
100%. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And for anyone trying to aspire to be a founder, I mean, my first piece of advice would be find someone that resonates with your way of thinking, and you guys can, truly start together, because it goes a long way having someone like that.
And I think I mentioned earlier that like my co-founder and I, like, we have a very similar way of wanting to structure the business and what our vision for what it means to run a successful business, what that looks like. And I think that's super important, because even though we're still at a very early stage, you're already kind of, when you're making decisions about how to structure things, you're kind of setting things in motion towards some vision that you have in the future, right? And as we know, most startup companies never get there, but you have to at least have some direction. You have to have a goal for what it is that you're striving towards. And if you and your co-founders aren't heading in the same direction, if you're not aiming towards the same goal, it makes an already unlikely task near on impossible, right? So, and so I think that's super important, is that you, even if you don't have to agree on everything, but if the overall vision aligns with each other, and if your overall philosophy about how to run a business and how to be a manager and how to be a leader and how to be a team player, those things I think need to have a lot of overlap, or else there's going to be too much discourse, early, that will just result in not having a direction.
Yes, I can speak about that from my own experience. So, I incorporated my company February of this year, and I had a different co-founder, a classmate, and initially we were like, okay, we're a good fit, we can, handle different aspects. But then as it moved forward through like summer, we had about like 4 or 5 employees, and it just really, we were clashing on different aspects. So I ended up buying his shares and found another co-founder, which I'm very happy with right now. So it really comes down to trial and error sometimes as well, because at the beginning you may think that, well, it's a great fit. Like, we have technical aspects, but the personality side of like, meshing together is very important as well. So just sometimes have to trial and error, but always, have a vision and just go for it, really. What motivates you?
Solving problems, I guess. That's so general of an answer that it is cliche, but it is, what motivates me is feeling like there are things that can be fixed, and there are like problems that people experience, and things that there's potential out there for people's lives to be made better, and that I have skill sets and I have tools that I can apply that will make their lives better. And I'm very fulfilled and satisfied by trying to solve those problems, right? Like, anytime that I've built something for somebody, physical, software, hardware, whatever, to then learn a day, a week, a month, a year later that it's helped them, that like it solved some problem that they were having, it allowed them to do something that they were previously struggling with doing, whatever it is, that feeling of like having solved that problem, even just for that one person, that's the feeling I'm chasing. I love that.
I can tell that main way of thinking for a founder of a company. Voxmail will go places, brother. Seriously, I think that's the best way to think about for any founder, to really just solve the problem, not look for money, not chase success in any sense. Just,
I mean, I'd love those things too. That would be great. That would be an awesome bonus. But yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, but just loving the game, truly. But lastly, what do you think is the meaning of life?
Every part of me wants to make a joke, but no, I think it's going to be different for different people, but to generalize it, I think it's human connection. I think it's the process of collaborating with and like meeting new people, forging those connections, and as you move through life, having that sort of the having those connections weave the tapestry of your life, if that makes sense. Because I think there's very few experiences that I've had in my life that really stand out to me that didn't involve somebody else, right? That might be them literally like having that experience with me, going through it with me, or it might be that I was sent in a particular direction because of an interaction that I had with a person. But I think that like they are in many cases the kind of as you start to break down life into smaller and smaller chunks, those feel like the kind of the atomic pieces that make up a life, is like what interactions and connections did you have with other people. And so that's what I think the meaning of life is.
Cade, it was fantastic speaking to you.
It's been awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Thank you guys for watching. We'll see you next time.